I'm Vanessa Cho, and I'm head of design here at GV. I'm here to kick off our GV office hours where I'll tackle current design issues that our entrepreneurs and startups face every single day, and I'm going to go straight to the experts to get their take on it. Today, we'll talk about design influence and how, when, and why design should have a seat at the table. Our first guest is Dill, an incredible design leader that recently has joined us as an advisor to our GV portfolio. Before that, she ran experience design at Airbnb, and most recently, she ran all of design at Lyft. Really excited for you to hear this conversation we have, where I kick it off and I ask her how her experience was at Lyft. I'd love to learn more about Lyft. I think, when you joined, you were part of the executive team, not yet reporting to the CEO, but what was it like when you joined? What was the team like in terms of the structure and overall the impact that design had at the company at that time?
When I came to Lyft, the organization was set up in a pretty interesting way. Essentially, design was operating as a centralized agency. And, this was not only in the way they worked, but also, physically how they sat and how they were separated. So design had a studio that was gorgeous part of the building with a door that separated designers from product managers and engineers and scientists. And in most cases, they were not aligned in terms of team structure. So the way it would work was that, let's say, a product manager and their team had developed a idea for a product. They figured out the problem, they figured out the idea, and then they would basically ask for design help. But essentially what was happening is the design was coming in at certain stages of the work, and oftentimes what would feel like a late stage of the work, right? The idea is already there. Now just go and put some pixels on it. And that's actually not a great way to do design. Great designers are humanistic, they're creative, or they're strong observers. And so they can really help understand what is the problem truly and what might be the most effective and perhaps creative solution to solving that problem. We made some major changes to how design was organized. And so part of that was physically getting them out of the room, getting them sitting with engineers and product managers, et cetera, and staffing folks onto teams together. And so that they could really create a cohort.
I think it's always amazing. I think one thing that we both always coach and we advise was it's like really design needs to break through whatever barriers there are, it's like barriers in terms of how products are designed or, it's like meetings that they're in. But it's interesting you bring up actually the physical barrier where physically you were all seated somewhere else. Lyft went through a transformation, it's like while you were there. What happened next? I'm curious.
We shifted the way that design operated and helped to make design a key part of how the company built product and how the company operated with that increase of influence that I was talking about. So that was one. I think we really kind of put ourselves on the map, which helped. But then two, there were still some gaps in the way that the company was operating. And so in the move to lines of business, some of those gaps became exacerbated. Because in our executive team, we had somebody who was responsible for rideshare, somebody who was responsible for bikes and scooters, somebody who was responsible for autonomous cars and fleet, our kind of car rental part of our business. And those people have to focus on those very meaty, complex areas. And it's not that any one of them don't care about the user. Of course they do. They know that that's essential to running a good business. Because at the end of the day, a Lyft customer experiences one Lyft. They don't know, and they shouldn't know, and they shouldn't care about the different lines of business, right? And so one of the things that a design organization can do is to help kind of like see through those gaps between the silos and kind of unite. And so that's when I shifted to join the executive team and report to the CEO so I could bring that voice there.
A couple tips that you bring up was just like, yes, absolutely being, very close side by side with product, with and actually with the strategy and having design operate that way. But then also not losing sight of that connective tissue, to making sure that you are holding that customer journey from beginning all the way to the end. You talk about it very humbly, where you're just like, yes, and then that's when you joined the executive team and started reporting to the CEO. But I'm curious, what was there a milestone or what triggered, the actual change?
A rare moment of courage. I wrote a letter to my boss and the CEO and our president, the two founders essentially, that I thought I should be in the executive team. Of course, I talked about it with my boss before, and he did the right thing as a leader and was very supportive of this conversation, and even gave me a few tips on how to frame it. But essentially, I laid out what I was seeing as some of the gaps and some of the challenges our org faced, and then laid out how I thought I could be more helpful to our organization by being present in that room. And the awesome thing is that they responded and said no. And that's totally fine because the no came with why. One key piece was that he and I didn't yet have that kind of relationship where he felt I was really comfortable being candid and pushing back. And he was working really hard to build an executive team where that could happen, where people were going to be honest and, push back on each other and that they could have a really strong dynamic. And I really applaud that. I think he had done an excellent job building that organization, building that team such that those conversations could happen. And I think a key thing here is, and maybe a side note in terms of, other leaders out there, I think it can be really hard to ask for what you feel is necessary. But frankly, there really is no harm in asking. And although I got a no, I don't think, I hindered anything or, upset the status quo by asking. And in fact, I just learned a lot more through that process such that eventually, having learned from that, I could build a better relationship with our CEO. And then a few months later, he reached out to let me know that he wanted to change the organization and bring me into that room. Now, would that have happened if I hadn't written that letter? I don't know. But I think, sometimes it's really important if you see something that others don't, bring that point up because, I don't think it's any malintent, but, folks are busy and he may just not have had the time to see that, or he may not have been able to connect the dots of, what was missing and what I could provide. So I'm really glad I pointed that out and I'm really glad how it ended up. And so to this day, the head of design sits in that room and is a part of the executive org reporting the CEO.
Which is amazing. I mean, there are a couple of things that I'd love to tease out is one, a question I definitely get from founders is like, how will I know where I place design if it's successful? And here we have a story where you were able to see through the transformation, you and your team. And even when you left, you realized that the function itself will sit on, the C-suite, which is a great testament to the work that your team and you have done. I think the other thing is really interesting. You hit on basically a letter, which served as a vehicle for our conversation. Oftentimes, I coach design leaders or even founders, and they don't yet have the clarity in terms of the expectations of what does it mean to actually be a design executive at that company. The design leader won't know, nor will the founder. And so it's important to have that conversation about expectations and to provide that clarity so you can build that relationship of what it would be. Katie, I mean, hats off to you. You wouldn't have known. You might have been like, oh, I should probably build another function or do these other things. But just by asking, you have the clarity and it gives you ability to focus on it. As you reflect back, and it's always, hindsight is always 20/20, any surprises that you have?
The reality is that when you get into the room where these decisions are made, obviously you gain a lot of insight as to the process of how these decisions are made, what the group had thought through and how they assessed, and then what ended up landing as the decision and why. I think a lot of organizations really struggle with sharing the right amount of insight into that process. Yeah. And because of that, unfortunately, there can be a lot of distrust in the organization. For whatever reason, folks often assume the worst and think, well, this team didn't, I can't believe they landed on this decision. They certainly didn't think about X, Y, and Z, and, kind of assume perhaps a much skimpier thought process than maybe really actually happened. And so I have felt a really, great awakening in having, shifted my role in the organization to realize just what an opportunity there is for, an executive team to better communicate out what they're going through and what they're learning and what they're, discerning between, and then therefore deciding. Now, obviously, you can't share everything, but I do think it's really important that you bring your teams along with you and help them understand how decisions are made. Basically, it's really just designing, right?
Yeah.
Just like you would design a product, help your audience, kind of make use of what is happening in the change of the product and what the product does. Think of that in terms of your organization as well. Design the communications, design the way that you're, bringing apart a change for your organization so that they can better kind of move along with you.
That's it's interesting you bring that up. That is definitely a common thing that design execs realize, where it's like, well, will I just keep continuing to do what I've been doing, but just do it with a different audience? But they realize at different stages the superpowers that they gain and how design helps them. And often it is about being another voice to really help craft the communication and helping translate to see like how will this communication land with the team or with the customers, and what is a different way for us not only to test it out but to actually express it as well. I'd love to maybe step back a little. Your gig before, you were head of experience design at Airbnb. I'd love to hear, what were some similarities or some differences?
Yeah. Yeah, in many ways, there's a lot of similarities between Lyft and Airbnb. I think part of that is, the culture, this very kind of humanistic culture of, wanting to make real change, but, do so through community. Obviously, they're both gig economy companies. And so there is this very, complicated role that the company and design play in trying to help people create something and deliver value when they're not direct employees, right? So, how do you help a driver be, a great driver, or help a host be a great host? And then, in terms of the organization and the leadership, Airbnb is founded by two designers. So from the get-go, they truly understood the skills and the qualities of design and the thinking that, many designers bring to the table about, putting the customer first, an approach that leverages visualization and ideation and creative thinking. And that, is basically there from day one. Lyft, the founders are not designers. However, they are, of course, extremely customer minded. But when you come to the table with, design thinking, as Brian would say, it's not that, he had a seat at the table. It was his table. And so he really was able to embed design thinking in just about everything that the company did. But it's an ongoing process. I think the leaders in the organizations both have kind of different skill sets. So, different things might have their kind of like their peaks and their valleys within the organization. But I'm excited to see that both have put, so much emphasis on design and recognize it as a key strategic part for the company's success.
Mm-hmm. Other companies, it's just a question of where are they in their journey of understanding the power of design, and what is the willingness that they want to embrace it and let it, quite frankly, transcend everything and all the decisions that they make. Maybe let's bring up the conversation even higher and just talk about the industry in general, about what trends do you think you're seeing about design influence or impact, or even maybe tactical in terms of reporting lines?
I think the phrase design needs a seat at the table has been floating around, look at design Twitter, it has been around for, I don't know, maybe 10 years. People have been talking about this.
Yeah.
And so one that's a good sign is that design is, a key part of companies, and perhaps, we have made our way in the door in such a way that, we can even push further. And I guess it raises a couple of questions. Is one, is it still a debate? Should design have a seat at the table? And what does a seat at the table mean?
Yeah.
And, I just shared with you the whole story of how I, moved to be reporting to the CEO. And I think I probably relayed that I thought it was a good thing. However, I gotta say, I don't know if design always needs to report to the CEO. I'm not saying it's essential. I think really the most important thing is to understand is that what is the business trying to do? And does it have the right people and disciplines in place in order to do it? Now, all businesses are trying to add value, right? You want to deliver value to the customer in a sustainable way so that you can keep doing so. Now, you might have an executive organization where let's say that, the CEO is a designer, or let's say, the chief product officer has a really, in-depth and powerful sense of understanding the customer, and they're able to organize their team and channel it in such a way that they are really strongly bringing in, that user voice into the fold, and perhaps are responsible for enough of the business, enough of the product area that they, can see around all of these pieces and be that glue. So frankly, there's kind of like a checklist of things that need to be happening at the executive level, because it's essential for, the culture and the way the company operates. And then it's just a matter of like, are these things getting done? Yeah. Does it need to be getting done by somebody with a design in their title, or is it getting done by somebody with, chief product officer, chief technology officer? It is very well possible. And I think the key thing that people have to recognize, if whether you're a designer or anyone else in the organization is trying to figure it out, is to, really just like take stock of where are we today? What are we good at? What are our gaps? And then, how might different solutions solve for that? And certainly a solution is to, make somebody responsible for that customer voice and that experience glue, and, have that person sit in the executive org and have that person become your chief design officer. That may be a very viable solution, but it certainly isn't the only solution. And so I just caution you against that red herring of, everybody needs a chief design officer, because frankly, I think there's plenty of orgs where that's not the right solution.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. I think we do talk about the designer at the table, but then Katie, you and I have always joked, and it's like, oh, do you have a seat at the table? Great. Is it at the kiddie table or is it at the adults table? So really, I love your advice that you have, where just take the moment, take stock, and actually breaking down, what are the activities needed? What is the gaps that we have, and who are the right people, to be able to fill those gaps and those voice. I would say yes. I mean, just because we just see a lot of different companies at different stages. I think overall the trend is we are seeing more design execs, at the table, lending their voice. And it's exciting, especially on the consumer side. We see that it's almost becoming table stakes at large, mature companies. I think on enterprise, it still is a point of differentiation. But I hope that in a couple of years, it will also become table stakes that we have. But I think, Katie, what you alluded to is timing is actually probably the most important thing when you're thinking about the placement of design. Of course, when you look at the life cycle of a company, when a company is just starting, it's a founder, and they do end up hiring a designer, of course they'll report into them. But then actually, hopefully we have high exponential growth, and it's actually pretty common then for design to be layered into product or tech or sales. Quite frankly, anybody that's really holding those strategic decisions about the product that you're building and the customer you're trying to serve. Where at times I have advised, I was like, wow, what is on your roadmap? What are you trying to solve? And the CEO says, I really need to focus on infrastructure, or I really need to focus on privacy and trust, or, it's just like thinking about internationalization, and which may be actually further from design and the customer for this next 6 months or for 12 months. And so really advising at that point, it's just like the founder and the design leader, where is the best place for you right now? But a fun trend I've seen is after they hit that full maturation, I've seen design again being pulled out. Somewhere, it's just like, as you mentioned, Katie, your story at Lyft, being pulled back out, reporting into the CEO, because design has definitely transcended the product and really is a contributing part of building out a sustainable company. And it's been exciting. It's been exciting to see it, but I agree. I think it can be a red herring when a founder says, I heard that I have to have design report to me, and let's do it.
I think, the reality is there's a lot of different types of design. There are, certainly design teams and design leaders that are very focused on, the product delivery, what, in some cases, even just, the surface level of that. And then there are product leaders that are going further into understanding how the business works and wanting to see the business work better, wanting to bring that customer voice in, wanting to facilitate strategic conversations that really allow the company to better, set vision and better, develop really powerful thinking. And and I guess the other piece that I was talking about earlier is also, thinking about how do you handle HR and org change?
Yeah.
Is that designed? Is your solution designed? Could a designer help you with that? So when you start to get into those other aspects, and you have a design leader that can help with that, that's really powerful. So it's, having to think not just, externally, what does a designer do for my, organization and help me deliver a better product, but internally, can this person help us operate better? And if they can do both, I think that's an even stronger argument as to why you want to make sure they're in, the rooms where the highest level long-term thinking is happening.
I love that. I think it actually is a nice segue to our next question. It's just like, so, what advice would you provide to a designer that is eager to have a seat at the table? What do you tell them? And I bet you and I, we get this question a lot. It's like, you have a seat at the table. How do I get one?
Yeah. All right. I'm dying to hear your answer. I'll say very quickly, I think it's, if somebody wants to, they feel they need to report to the CEO, my first question, of course, is going to be why. Because if you have a solid reason for that, then absolutely, the path is laid out for you on how to go about doing that. Is just to raise visibility to that, challenge, that problem you're trying to solve, and how that your solution gets you there. If it's about, needing a title or needing, a certain kind of reporting structure because you think it's going to give you more power in decision making, I think that there's a false hope there, because the reality is you shouldn't need a title and you shouldn't need a certain reporting line just to be able to contribute and have influence. I think you need to build that in many ways outside of those things. But really, frankly, just get tight on the why, and then have that open discussion with your CEO, and discuss. Just similarly, as I had pointed out earlier, don't be afraid of a no. Truly try to understand it, and perhaps that no is something that is temporal because there's a reason to kind of work with that, or perhaps that no is for a very good reason, and there's other ways that you can create that solution that you're striving for.
Yeah. I know we're supposed to be disagreeing, and adding different perspectives, but I'm in violent agreement with what you said. I think the thing is that, quite frankly, always asking with why, and then going and asking for more clarity as to what the gap is, and having that conversation with the CEO. And oftentimes, if they don't have the courage yet, I do recommend to, for the design leader themselves to self-evaluate and to self-assess them. How does the CEO, the executive staff, or more importantly, the company see you in terms of your influence and impact? Do they assess you as an incredible design leader, owning the craft and the quality about the product, and really speaking for the product? And that's a design leader. Or do they see you on top of being a design leader, really being that customer advocate with those user-centric perspectives and bringing that and transcending the product, to your point, working with that HR partner or working with the CFO to drive cost savings? Is that the role that you have at the company? And is that how you're seen? Or maybe that next level, that final level, where it's like, actually, you're not really even seen as a design leader or only as a customer voice. You're really just seen as a leader for the company that happens to use design to push the company forward. I would absolutely see, if you think and you have gotten proof that you are seen as the last category, you should absolutely be, just like part of that executive staff. But if you feel that you're in the first two categories and you do feel like you need to hit that last final milestone, then it's a conversation about, well, is it a skill gap? Let's put a learning development plan together. Or is it about access? And so most of the times I actually do think it is about access, about being shown the possibilities, about how you can work in different ways, to provide value to the business. And I often have found that working on internal projects is a great way to be able to reposition what your role is, what is the perspective, on people having about design. So it is about working with the talent partner to, it's like do a design sprint about new employee onboarding, or working with the COO to actually come up with a new program about culture and mission and using your storytelling abilities. I mean, that's the point. You're the researcher and the designer, and you have an ability to really transform the company. So, all right. Okay. So let's flip it now. What advice do you have to a founder and a CEO? And we covered a lot of it, but what advice would you give to a CEO or a founder on where best to house design within the company?
I think you start with, what are you trying to accomplish, right? So, what are the big, problems you're trying to solve? You're trying to create a business that you hopefully recognize needs to add value to whomever your customers are. And you hopefully see that, imperative in that is understanding your customers deeply, understanding long-term trends, where things are going, and being able to create a culture where great ideas can thrive, and true creativity is cultivated. And then, secondly, you have to ask yourself, have I set up my organization in order to make that happen? Mm-hmm. And there are, again, a number of different org structures that can help you do that. There are a number of things that you're going to be thinking about in terms of, well, I want people to be able to move fast. I want them to focus. I want to ensure that, we're thinking across the different product areas, but also really honing in and going deep into certain areas. And so you might end up setting up your organization in terms of separate lines of business, or perhaps it's one thing all under, one product officer. Perhaps you operate as the product officer. But when you sketch these things out and you ask yourself, okay, who is responsible for ensuring that we truly understand what the customer needs, and is the person that is making decisions about what ships really close to that person? Do they have that insight in there or not? And, how many lines of reporting structure can I remove to ensure that that is a, very open, two-way communication? And that may lead you to believe that, there is a necessary role of, a head of design that needs to be right alongside you, and they need to be reporting to you so you can communicate very closely with them. Or perhaps you're a little less close to the product, and maybe you have a chief product officer and you want to make sure that they and the head of design are closer. Design is certainly more than, how a thing looks. It's also more than how a thing works. Mm-hmm. It's actually, in many cases, how your company works.
I'm also surprised with when I'm talking to founders is actually rarely do they now say, design isn't important and I don't want them reporting to me. I mean, maybe because I'm a designer, so they can't just tell it to me in the face. Yeah. I just feel that over the years, we've just seen so many successful companies, companies that you have worked at that have been designed forward, that have shown that it's, I think, the latest report, published where it's like it's almost twice as much successful in terms of revenue that was brought in, and then, shareholder returns. We have seen that success, and quite frankly, our customers are asking for it. When I ask, why is a design leader not reporting it to you? It's always logistics. It's like, well, I actually have a designer, but they're not senior enough. So, we can't quite fill in the gap yet. And so then the conversation goes, it's like, great, what is the learning development plan? How can we actually help that design leader grow, and actually reach that? Or if the timeline doesn't quite match up, when are we going to hire an external senior designer? Or the other one is, one that comes out pretty often is like, we have a senior design leader and, they're great, but I, as a founder and a CEO, I don't have very much design background. And it's better for that design leader to report into Joe, in tech, because they used to have a design team. And that's when you can offer the reminder is like, actually, this design leader is already so senior. They're not looking for design mentorship from you. That's not what they need from you. They can find that in many different areas, but that doesn't work. They're looking to be part of this leadership team. And Katie, to your point, to really just bring their perspective in to help be part of this team as they grow and shape the company. I think the other thing is like, and the fairest point of all is like, listen, I just don't have time to actually take somebody else on. I already have 25 direct reports and I'm going and figuring out this other thing. And I just don't have time, which absolutely is not only fair, it's justified. And it goes again to talk about the timing. When is the right time? But there, just to spend like half an hour with a founder to be like, well, let's then just chart out what you're planning for this next year. It's just like, where are those inflection points where we're going to be making some big decisions? And to your point, Katie, it could be about the product, it could be about the customer, it could be about internal. Where are those moments or where that we all are coming together? And let's invite that designer then to come and have that conversation and bring their perspective in. I think often, and hopefully a takeaway is, it's just like, often this question seems very black and white. I get a question like, should this person report to me or not? But I think what we're saying, Katie and I are saying, is it's more nuanced than that. It's not as black and white. Where we've really seen duos do really well is in the gray. It's in the gray when they have the clarity in terms of expectations, and then also really being able to step up and having access to the opportunity as well.
Oh, that was really great. And I love how you capture and frame this. And, I think the nuance, it can be harder to understand, but I think you just laid it out really well, and kind of gave a bit of a rule of thumb on how to think about these things and recognize that every organization is different. It's comprised of people. People are very unique, and really understanding what the different players bring to the table.
It is always a pleasure. I would say any company and any team and myself, we're lucky to have you, and I appreciate all the work that you've done for all of us.
Thank you, Vanessa.
All right. Bye.